Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So today we're going over our Spotlight Cash review for the month of January. So as the first week of the season is wrapping up, did want to go through this, talk about which Spotlight weeks I think are good, which ones might not be so worth investing resources in. Now overall, I do think January is a little bit more of a quiet month. There are some neat cards here, but I'm not expecting a lot of the cards that are releasing this month to break the game or anything. However, that could always change depending on future balance updates, so we'll keep an eye out on that. But starting off with our first week here with Kyera, High Evo, and Nebula. If you watch the Day 1 Scar Dex and Kyera Dex video, you know I'm pretty high on this week. I actually think this is the best week of the month if you're missing 2 or all 3 of these cards. Nebula and High Evo go very well together. Kyera has been going pretty well in the High Evo decks too, and she's been finding a home in other places, namely decks that are trying to cheat out some big 6-drops like Thanos. Some have been trying her in Lockjaw, obviously High Evo. She's just been a pretty solid card overall for making sure your big 6-drop threats don't get dropped by Shang-Chi. And these are all Series 5 cards, so the fact that you can get these from the cache without having to drop a whole boatload of tokens is really nice. So yeah, if you're missing 2 out of 3 or more of these cards, I think this is by far the best week here. And it's especially appealing to newer players, as just by getting High Evo and Nebula, you're most of the way there to a very competitive deck. Next up, we have the week of January 9th to the 16th, this upcoming week. This one includes Hercules, Werewolf by Night, and Howard the Duck. So we had some questions and clarification on Hercules. Initially, one of the responses we got from the developers made it sound like Hercules was actually going to be able to move multiple cards per turn, not just one. It just couldn't move the same card more than once. However, it was later clarified that that was incorrect, and it is just like his text states, which is the first time a card moves to his location, that turn he bounces out of it. I think this card is really bad. I just don't really see what this card is trying to do here. I think the idea is, well, if you're playing like a move deck with Silk or Spider-Man or something, maybe you move into his lane, it bounces him back, you get a little Craven value. It's kind of cute, but for a 4-drop that, I mean, 4/6s are decent stat line, but just the effect feels so mediocre. And the fact that it doesn't work how a lot of people were originally hoping with Heimdall in terms of bouncing multiple things back, I just don't really see how this card finds a place in any of the move decks, even the Heimdall ones. It just doesn't seem very good. So this would be a card I would not be surprised if is buffed in some way, but that isn't enough to justify going for it in my opinion. Then Werewolf and Howard. Howard, you know, some people really like Howard, but those numbers are few and far between. He's also dropping to Series 4 by the time this week releases. So he'll be a Series 4 card, so not quite as much value there in terms of getting a Series 5 or 4 out of a cache. And then Werewolf. Werewolf has just really struggled to find a proper home after the nerf. There are some bounce decks playing it. I don't think the card's awful by any means, but it's nowhere near as universal of a threat as it was before, and it just doesn't seem to be having the greatest time. So I think this is a week that most players should probably be avoiding. Then we have the week of January 16th to the 23rd. This contains Meek, Annihilus, and Phoenix Force. So Meek is some more discard support, moving around the board and gaining power each turn when you discard a card. Discard has proved to like these kind of scaling 1-drops in the past, and he is a Series 4, so even if you don't like the Spotlight week, maybe he can be a token purchase if you're really devoted to discard. But discard hasn't had the best of time. People are still playing it. It's still playable. But it's no secret that the nerf to America Chavez was especially hard on discard. The discard does have some other cool tools coming up in the February month, it looks like, and sounds like they might be buffing Dracula, so maybe it'll give discard a little bit of a boost. But personally, I'm not expecting Meek to really fix the problems discard has. I like the idea behind it. I like a 1-drop that can scale. We've seen Nebula do that really well, and as such is played in a lot of decks, which at one point included discard. But I think the biggest issue with Meek is not being able to control where this card ends up going. Since it's random where it moves, that could really screw you over, and I don't think the upside of the potential power on the card is necessarily worth that downside of it potentially risking losing you the game. But who knows? Silk had a similar downside, and she was very strong, so I guess we'll see on that one. Annihilus. So if you haven't seen the recent video on the leaked nerfs, Annihilus sounds like he's going to a 5/5 and is not going to pass over cards that have 0 power, only below 0. Pretty significant nerf to this card. I do think the decks where Annihilus is good, he will remain good. I played quite a bit of Annihilus on my initial climb early in the season, and I tried to keep note of how many times the 2 power would have actually mattered, and truthfully, it wasn't a whole lot. There will be times when it matters. 2 power is a significant nerf, but you know, when you do get those nutty Sentry into Annihilus curves, I think the card will still be really good, and I think running the Sentry Annihilus Hood package is something decks will still do. You just might not see quite as many of them as before, but Annihilus, if you like junk archetype stuff, or just that small package, is definitely a card worth going for. Then Phoenix Force. I like Phoenix Force as a card. It had like a very brief moment of resurgence after the bug finally got fixed, then it got stomped out by Professor X. I thought when X went away, this card would come back a bit, but right now the meta feels like it's all about either going stupidly tall with things like Blob or Infinite, or reacting to those threats and answering those threats. And Phoenix Force just isn't having that great of a time with those being kind of the main thing decks are doing right now. So in general, I think this is a bit of an underwhelming week unless you really, really want to get Annihilus. Obviously, if you're missing 2 or 3 out of the cards, it's a bit more appealing, but not super hot on the other cards outside of Annihilus right now. And that brings us to Grandmaster Week. So January 23rd to the 30th, we have Grandmaster, Loki, and Hitmonkey. Grandmaster is kind of a neat one. We did get some clarification on this card. So he will move a card at his location to the middle lane and then re-trigger its on-reveal effect. This feels like it is a potentially powerful combo piece, although I don't really know where it's going to find a home initially. I'm not sure if it even will find a home initially, but it does feel like at some point in some time, this is going to double some on-reveal effect that is going to be very significant. But I imagine that will be more so in the future once we've had more powerful on-reveals added to the game. So I don't see anything too game-breaking with this card right on release, but very powerful effect. Unique effect of kind of merging a move and on-reveal archetype. Maybe you'll see some more stuff in that direction, but it's hard to imagine any of the decks that currently exist making space for this one right now, even though it seems like a fine card. Loki is scheduled to be getting a nerf to a 4/6, but he will no longer be pumping the Collector, and the cards transformed by Loki will no longer be getting that Quinjet reduction unless that transformed card was a generated card before it went under the transformation. At least that's how it currently works with things like Spider Ham Pigs and whatnot with Quinjet. So yeah, I think Loki is still a really solid card to go after. I think he is going to be taken down quite a bit by the nerf, but I do think it will remain a viable deck. Will be a tier 1 deck. Kind of hard to say, but I think it will at least be a deck you can play and win with, though it's probably going to look more like the Dino versions we're seeing now rather than relying on stealing your opponent's stuff and pumping the Collector as the main win condition. And honestly, I'm happy to see that be moved away from a bit. But yeah, still a good card if you haven't picked it up already, but you might want to wait and see just how the impacts of the nerf affect it, since the nerf will be live for a good while by the time this Spotlight Week comes up. And then Hitmonkey. I love Hitmonkey, really fun card, but the only place Hitmonkey's really seeing play right now is Bounce, and it's kind of fringe versions of Bounce at that. Now, I think he's still really powerful in that shell, so if you really do like dedicated Bounce decks, Hitmonkey could be a card for you. He used to see play in Sarah Control, but a lot of the Sarah decks have kind of moved in different directions without Hitmonkey. So even though he's a good card, it just feels like the places he is finding a home in right now are very few and far between. It's kind of just one specific deck, so unless you're really, really interested in that specific deck, Hitmonkey probably isn't a priority for you. Again, it's a full series 5 weeks, so if you're missing 2 out of 3 or 3 out of these 3 cards, it's not bad just to get a hold of them. Who knows how things are going to change in the coming weeks with balance and whatnot. But overall, I think the cards are fairly solid in the week, but it's also one you wouldn't really mind skipping if you already have 1 or 2 of them. And that brings us to our final week here, January 30th through February 6th, including Beta Ray Bill, Galactus, and Elsa Bloodstone. So Beta Ray Bill is Thor at home. He shuffles his own little Mjolnir into the deck, but it's a 0/1, and instead of giving it a set amount of power when the on-reveal goes off, it doubles his power. So if you are a enjoyer of the Thor Jane Jaw deck, this is a insta-buy. This is very much going to go right alongside Thor and Jane and all them. Outside of that, not really sure where this finds a home, but that's kind of okay. I think it's okay for cards to have, one specific deck they really want to thrive in. There were some other Thor decks experimented with, not too long ago, where it was kind of like a miracle deck with Hitmonkey and a bunch of other cheap stuff, and it used the Jane to draw your zeros as well as the hammer. So maybe this finds a home there. That'd be kind of interesting. But I'm pretty excited for this card personally as an enjoyer of that deck. The other cards this week, though, Galactus and Elsa. Galactus has seen a tiny bit of a resurgence, but a big part of that, I think, has to do with Miss Marvel's been pretty strong with him, as has Annihilus, and both those cards are getting nerfed. So kind of a wait and see on what happens to Galactus. But if one thing's for sure, Galactus enjoyers are not going to give him up easily. And we'll see if they can make things work. And then Elsa. Elsa has had it pretty rough with her whole trio package here, herself included, getting nerfed of Angela, Elsa, Kitty. Elsa just has not been finding a home as much of late. She's not really necessarily a bad card. It's just really hard to justify her because when you're putting Elsa in a deck, you kind of need a package that takes advantage of her. And the cards that previously did that, they just aren't really making the cut right now. So I'm kind of hoping that at some point Elsa gets a bit of a buff to return her a little bit to her former glory. Maybe not as crazy as she was at launch, but definitely, hopefully better than we have now. Again, another full series 5 week, so if you're interested in these cards and you're missing 2 out of 3 of them, it's generally a good week. But in terms of specific decks, Beta Ray Bill, very much the Lockjaw Thor kind of deck being the big one. Galactus obviously being Galactus decks, and Elsa not really showing up too many places aside from maybe some fringe bounce decks or some outdated versions of Sarah Control. There we have it. So that is going to wrap up our Spotlight overview. So just a quick recap, I think by far the best week is the first week we are in right now with Kyera. I think the second best week in terms of overall card quality is probably going to be the Grandmaster week. Third best, I would say, is Beta Ray Bill week, mainly because I think he is one of the strongest cards of the bunch releasing this month, even though the home he finds is fairly narrow. Meek comes in at number 4, mainly because if you want Meek, you should probably just buy him with tokens, but again, if you're looking for Annihilus, might not be bad. And then Hercules week, well, it has Howard the Duck and Hercules, so what more is there to say about that? Easy last place here, sadly. I'd love to hear what you think, though. What weeks are you looking forward to, planning to use your resources on? Let me know in the comments below. But yeah, it's going to wrap it up for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.